In this video, we're going to see how we can use serializers to not only create an object, but also to create any related objects when we send a post request from the client to our Django REST Framework server. What we're going to do in a nutshell is learn how to create writable nested representations. And one example of that in our application is for this order serializer. When we want to create a new order, we send a post request, and that post request is going to have the data for the order, and the data is specified in these fields here. But some of the fields are read-only, for example, the order ID and the items. Now that's the important one because the items that belong to an order, they are the nested items that make up that order. Now we learned near the start of the series that the order item serializer can be nested inside the order serializer, and because we're passing 𝗏any equals true to that, that means that when we send a GET request to get all of the orders, we also get back the order items because we have this nested serializer. But notice that it has read only set to true, and that means that it's not going to be applied on a post request. So the order items are not specified in the post request at the moment. That's what we want to change in this video. We want to allow the client to send the items with the order. Now the reason it's read only at the moment is because we don't have a mechanism for actually creating these order items when that post request is sent. But we're going to learn how to create that nested writable representation in this video, and we're going to override the serializer's create method in order to do that. Now before we get into it, we have a Ko-fi page that's linked in the description of the video. Thanks very much to everyone who's supported the channel on this. If you are enjoying this content or finding it useful and you want to support the channel, then it would be amazing if you check this page out. So I'll leave a link to that just in the pinned comment as well. Let's get back to the video. What we're going to show here is this sentence that we have after this header. So writing create methods for nested representations. If you're supporting writable nested representations, you need to write a create or an update method that is going to handle saving multiple objects. Here's an example with a user serializer. That has a nested profile serializer, so imagine a one-to-one relationship between a user and a profile model. When you want to create a new user, you're wanting to also create the associated profile. So what happens here is we override the serializer create method, and the validated data that's passed in the request, we pop that out of that validated data dictionary, and then we can create the profile from that profile data, as you can see here. So we override create, and we're telling Django REST Framework how to create the related objects when we get this post request. We're going to do something similar with the order and the order items now. Now what we're going to do to start with is just remove this read-only constraint from the items, and we're going to start the development server at the bottom, and I'm going to go to the localhost 8000/orders page. Now we're on that orders page now, and if we go to the bottom, we have the form for actually creating a new order. Now orders are tied to a user, and we can also give the order a status. And notice we have this items, and whatever this says here, lists are not currently supported in HTML input. So basically if we post this, you can see we can no longer create the order like this because the items field is now required because we removed read only equals true on this nested serializer. So when we create an order, we actually have to pass order items with this new method. So that's not what we want necessarily. So I'm going to bring back read only to true here. And we're actually going to fix this soon by creating a new serializer that's specific for actually creating order items. Now at this stage, I want to go to 𝗵𝗽𝗍.http, and I'm going to go to the bottom. What we're going to do is send a post request to /orders. So let's copy this header here. I'm going to create a new request just below here. This is going to be a post request. So let's change the method to post. And I'm going to copy a few of the headers here. So we need the content type header, and that's going to be set to application/JSON. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a JSON body here. So let's say we want to create a new order and we want this body to be sent in the request. So we have the status of the order, which is set to pending. The user ID is just going to be 1. And we then have the items, which is a list here containing 2 order items. Now we've got the server running. I'm going to save this and let's send the request and see what happens here. And I'm getting an error at the bottom. We need a space in between the HTTP headers and the body here. So let's try that again and send the request. And we get back this error, authentication credentials were not provided. So we need to authenticate here. What I'm going to do in order to do that is go to the token endpoint. We can send the request with John Doe, and we get back the access token that we can then add to the header. So I'm going to copy the access token, and let's go back to this post request. I'm going to change the user ID to 2, which is John Doe's ID. And then in the headers, we can add the authorization header, and we'll set that to a bearer token and paste in that token here. If you're not familiar with this, check out the previous videos we did on JWT authentication with Django REST Framework. If we try this again and send the request, this time we get back a response. So the order has been created in the database and it's got this order ID, but notice that there are no items being returned here for this order. Now the problem is that the serializer that we have has no idea how to create order items from this incoming request body. Let's close this response here and go back to serializers.py and look at the order item serializer. That's just above here. We have fields here that don't map to anything on the order item model. So if I bring up models.py here and we look at the order item class, notice that an order item only really requires the product and the quantity to be specified, as well as, of course, the order itself. If we go back to serializers.py, this serializer has a product name field, which is derived from a product's name, and also a product price field. We don't need any of that. We need the quantity and we need the product ID. If we look at api.http, that is what we're sending here in the items array. So let's now move on and create a new serializer specifically for actually creating an order with an associated list of items. So just below the order item serializer, I'm going to create a new class here and it's going to be called order create serializer. And that's going to inherit from the model serializer that we've been working with in most of this series. Let's define the meta class for the serializer and we're going to link the model serializer to the order model. Ultimately, we are creating an order, but we are going to tell REST Framework how to create the actual items as well. And for the fields, I'm going to copy what's on the other order serializer. Let's copy all of these and I'm going to bring that into this class here. And we don't need the order ID to be specified by the client. That's going to be created automatically, as well as the created at field itself. But we can leave the rest, for example, the user, the status, the items, and the total price. Soon we're going to automatically set the user, but I'm going to keep it in the request for now. Now on the post request, when we create the order items alongside the order, we're going to need to create a serializer specifically for those nested items. So I'm actually going to do this as an inner class here. And let's call this order item create serializer. And again, that's going to be a model serializer. And notice that that's nested inside the order create serializer. And that's because I don't think we're going to need this serializer outside of the parent context. So let's create this model serializer's meta class. And the model for this one is going to be order item this time. And the fields are the ones we mentioned before, and that's going to be the product itself and the quantity. And now that we've created this nested class, what we can do is set the items for the order create serializer to be an instance of the order item create serializer. And because we expect one-to-many items to be passed or zero-to-many, we need to pass many equals true here to tell Django REST Framework about that. So what we have now is an order create serializer. And what we pass when we actually create an order is the user. And again, we'll change that very soon and derive that automatically. But we are also passing the status of the order, which could be pending or confirmed. We're passing any order items that we want to create alongside the order. And finally, the total price. I actually think that's something we can remove as well. So let's get rid of total price. That makes sense because the total price should be derived from the items that are part of the order. Although as a client, I think it would be very nice if we could specify our own total price if we had multiple order items. That might be quite good for the customer, but not so much for the business. I want to now import this new serializer into views.py. So let's go to views.py and at the top, we're going to import that. And that's from the api.serializers module. We're importing the order create serializer. Now let's go to the order view set that we've been working with in the last set of videos. When we think about what we want to achieve here, when the user sends a post request, we want to actually create an order create serializer, or we want to use an order create serializer. And for all other requests, we want to just use the normal serializer class that we've set here, which is the order serializer. Now it turns out that view sets and generic views have a method that we can override to change the serializer class depending on the action or the request method. So let's do that just now. What we're going to do is create a method here, and the name of this method is getSerializerClass. That allows you to dynamically select the serializer depending on the context of the request. Now the default here is to return super.getSerializerClass, which will just return an instance of the order serializer. So what we can check in the view set is self.action. We can check if that is equal to the create action. And then if that's true, we can actually return a different serializer. And the one I'm going to return is the order create serializer. Now that logic is very simple. If it's the create action, in other words, a post request, we will use the order create serializer to take the incoming request body and convert that to what we need. Otherwise, we're just going to use the normal serializer, which is specified in this field here. And I'm going to leave a comment above this. You can also check if it's a post request directly. We have access to self here. So self.request.method will give you the incoming request method. So if you need to check that to specify or determine your serializer, you can also do that. So I want to check this out now. It's still not going to work, but we're going to gradually and iteratively build this up. Let's go back to api.http. If we try and send this request now, let's see what happens. And I don't have a valid token, so I'm going to replace that token now. So I've replaced the token, and let's send the new request and see what happens. And we're getting a 500 internal server error. Now let's look at the terminal at the bottom here and see what's happened. So what we have is an assertion error. The create method does not support writable nested fields by default. We need to write an explicit create method for the order create serializer, or we need to set read only to true on the nested serializer fields. So that is quite a helpful message from Django REST Framework actually. So what we can do is go back to serializers.py. This message is telling us that for this new serializer, we have this nested serializer, but we need to set that to be read only, or we need to override the create method to tell the serializer how to go about creating these nested items. So let's follow the good advice of Django REST Framework, and we're going to override the create method. And what the create method gets, as we saw in the documentation, is the validated data. Now what I'm going to extract from that is order item data. So we're going to use the validated data, which is a dictionary in Python, and we're going to pop out the items from that. So basically that's going to take these items and it's going to pop it out of that dictionary, and it's going to return whatever was in that validated data for the items key, and we have that available now in this variable. Once we've done that, we can safely create the order itself. Remember that the order can be created without these items, and it's going to use the other two fields here to create the order. So what we can do here is we can get the order and we can call order.objects.create. So just normal Django ORM statements here, and I'm going to pass in the validated data after we've popped out the items. This is important because if we go to models.py, the order itself, if I can find it here, the order doesn't have an items field directly, it's just a set of related items. All we need to create the order is the status, and in this case we have the user as well. All of the other fields like order ID and created at are going to be derived fields. And then what we can do is go back to serializers.py. Once we've created the order, we can then go about creating the items. So let's create a loop here for item in order item data. And for each item, what we expect to have in the data is a product and a quantity. And the product is just going to be the primary key of the associated product. If we go back to models.py, order items are linked to products. So let's now create that order item. This is the model that we're creating here. So let's go back to the loop, and it's going to be order item.objects.create. And we're going to associate each order item with the order that was created in the line above the loop. And then we can take the order item data and we can just extract that and split that into keyword arguments using this syntax. And the item, of course, comes from the loop variable. And then the create method needs to return the model that's been created, and that was the order model. These are the related objects that we've created as part of this request. So just to go over what we're doing again here, we're extracting the order item data. And if we go to api.http and go to the bottom here, that's going to be the items key here. So basically we're popping that out of the dictionary, and that will remove it from the dictionary. And then we can create the order from the other data, which is the validated data that we have. If we go back here, it's going to create that from the other two fields. And then once we have the order, we can loop over each item in the order items and then call orderitem.objects.create. And we're associating that with the order that we created here. And we're also passing in the necessary data for the order item. Now let's go back to api.http and let's send that request to /orders again, and that's the post request. When we do that, we get back a different result. The order's been created for user 2 with a status of pending, but this time we actually get back the order items. Now we have a different response. We don't get the order ID in the response. What we get back in the schema here matches what we have in the fields here in the actual serializer that we've just created. And that's the create serializer. So we get back the user ID, the status, and the items. So we might want the order ID as part of this response. So how do we get that? Let's close this tab here and go back to the serializer. If we look at how we did this previously in the order serializer, we're going to take the order ID here, and that was a UUID field with read only set to true. And we can bring that into the serializer, and I'm going to add that just next to the items here. And then we can add the order ID into the fields. And because this is read-only, we don't need to then pass that as part of the post request. So we don't need to amend what we're sending here to add an order ID when we post that data. That's a read-only field, so it's only going to be returned as part of the response. So let's try it again, and I'm going to send this request. And you can see this time we get back the order ID as part of the response. Now if we go back to the browsable API, I'm on the order list page here, and I'm going to send a GET request to /orders. And if we go to the bottom of the page and get the last item in the response, you can see this order ID here, and that was created on the day that I'm currently recording this, and it has the 2 items that we added. So I want to just summarize here what's happening. When we send a post request, if we go to the view set here, what happens is we change the serializer that's used to decode essentially the incoming JSON data. And we use the order create serializer to do that, and that's this serializer that we created here, where we override the create method and use that to not only create the order itself, but also to create each order item in the incoming data. So when you need to create related items in Django REST Framework, what you're typically going to do is override this create method when you have a model serializer that's tied to the parent. Just as we have here, the class meta has the model set to the order. Now it's possible we could have amended the serializer that we have at the bottom to actually handle this itself. But the issue with the order serializer is it has this nested order item serializer, and that doesn't really work with the structure that we want to send in the post request because it contains items such as the product name. That's not really what we require for the given items. And in fact, all we need is a link to the product that we want to actually create an item for, as well as the quantity that we want to add of that product. So rather than try some complex logic, sometimes you're going to just create a new serializer for the create or the post requests, and indeed the update requests. And then you can use that serializer separately from the ones that you use for your GET requests. And that allows you to be flexible about the data that you're sending and returning from requests and responses. Now I want to finish this video by looking at how we can auto set the user. So what we have at the moment is explicitly passing the user ID as part of the request. And if we go to api.http, you can see that here on line 66, we're explicitly setting the primary key to the user. But typically when you create an order on the front end and you send that request, you are wanting the backend to automatically set the user for you. You don't want to allow the client to customize that because that's going to introduce some issues to your API. Now I'm going to go to the documentation, and we are on the serializers page here. And there's a section on passing additional attributes to the save method. So basically when you want to inject additional data at the point of saving the instance, you can do this using this mechanism. For example, serializer.save here is passing in an owner and setting that to request.user. Now I'm going to go to 𝗏𝗏𝗃 Django REST Framework, and we're going to look at the model view set. We've saw that in previous videos. What I'm going to do is look at some of the methods that are on the model view set, and there's one particular method that you can use if you need to pass additional parameters or arguments to the serializer save method. So let's scroll down here, and I'm going to look for this method. It's called perform create, and that is a method that you can see here that just calls serializer.save. But the method exists on the model view set to allow you to easily override this and then pass custom data into the save method as arguments. And notice as well as perform create, you can do this when you have destroy or delete requests, as well as update requests or put requests as well. So let's just copy the signature of this method here and go back to our model view set that we have in views.py, and I'm going to override the perform create method, and we're going to pass in the user to the serializer.save method. So we're going to reference self.request.user here in order to pass that in. Once we've done that, we can go back to serializers.py, and we have the user here, but we want to now make that a read-only field. So we want it returned after we've created the new order, so that we know what user the order is associated with. But we don't want the client to pass the user ID as part of the request, as we're currently doing in api.http. So how do we do that? Well, what we could do is we could set the user field here. And as we did with order ID, we could pass read-only equals true. But I want to show a second way you can create a read-only field here. And you can do it in the meta class of the model serializer. So we're going to create a new field here called extra kwargs, and we're going to set that to a dictionary in Python, and the user field is what we want to target here. And the keyword arguments we want to pass to the user are read-only, and we want to set that to true. So what we're doing here is we have an extra kwargs dictionary, And for the field user, which is part of the fields that we have in this serializer, we're passing these extra keyword arguments. And that's specified as a dictionary here with the keys of whatever we want to pass in. In this case, it's read only, and we're setting that to true. So now if we save this and go back to api.http, I'm going to remove the user from this request body, and I'm going to change the bearer token here. And once we've done that, if we send the request, we get back the response, so it's still working. And notice we have a user with the ID of 2 here, and that's been automatically created now. It's been derived from whatever user actually sends the request, the post request, to create the order. And I've changed the bearer token to the other user that we have, and that's the admin user. When we send that, we get back the order here, and notice that the user is now with the primary key of 1. So that user is now being automatically set to the authenticated user that's sending the request. And this prevents us from creating orders and setting that ID to some other user's ID, and perhaps making them pay for our orders. Now obviously this API is a bit contrived. We're not really creating an application from this at the moment, but we're just demonstrating some of the features of Django REST Framework here. So this is a few things that we've demonstrated in this video. I'm going to close this off. What we have is now a custom serializer for actually creating orders in the database and also creating these nested items. And in order to specify the logic for creating the related objects, we have overridden the create method on the serializer, and we create the parent object, and then we create a for loop here to create all of the individual child objects. And it's very easy to do. The create method gets the validated data based on the fields on the serializer, and then we can pop any pieces of information that relate to those nested objects, then create the parent object, and then for each one of the nested objects, we just have to loop over them, associate them with the parent, and create that data in the database. And what we also did in this video, if we go back to our view set here, is we used a couple of methods that are available on the view sets and generic views. For example, get serializer class. We used this to dynamically assign the serializer here. So for example, if it's a create action or a post request, we have the order create serializer, which is going to be used to take the incoming JSON data and make sense of that. Otherwise, we just default to what we've been using so far, which is the order serializer that we have here on the serializer class attribute. And then we also have the perform create method. This is a simple method that you can override if you need to pass any custom data into your serializer's save method. And that's useful here for automatically assigning the user property on the order model to whatever user is sending the create request. So we've learned quite a bit here about view sets and serializers and how we can use them when creating nested objects or related objects. And that's going to be all for this video. If you found the content useful, check out this Ko-fi page if you want to support the channel, and give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you've not already done so. That's greatly appreciated, and thanks very much to everyone who's supported the channel. We've got more Django REST Framework videos soon, and if you have any other requests, drop them in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.